All right, let's jump right in. The conflict in the Middle East is escalating, and it's happening fast. It's pulling in new players, and it really threatens to boil over into a much wider war. Today, we're going to break down how a regional conflict is getting dangerously close to becoming a full-blown global crisis. So, this is the big question, right? This is what we're really digging into today. Using the latest intel, we're going to explore the strategies at play, look at the new fronts that are opening up, and track the ripple effects that are already being felt thousands of miles away from the epicenter. To really get what's happening here, you have to start with Iran's core strategy. Now, this isn't about some quick, decisive victory. No. This is a long game. It's a war of attrition, and it's designed specifically to wear its enemies down over time. You see, Iran's leadership seems to believe it can win simply by outlasting its opponents. They know that a country like the United States is really sensitive to economic costs, to the drain on its military stockpiles, so the goal isn't to defeat America in a head-to-head battle, but to make the fight so incredibly expensive that Washington eventually decides it's just not worth it anymore. And a major arena for this economic warfare is the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most critical choke points for global oil supplies on the planet. And Iran's weapon of choice here? The humble, but deadly, naval mine. And the scale of this threat? It's honestly staggering. Iran has an arsenal of up to 6,000 naval mines just sitting there ready to be deployed. And it's not just one kind of mine. They have several different types, and each one has a very specific and very nasty purpose. First up, you've got the classics, contact mines. Yeah, think of the spiky metal balls you see in old war movies. Now, modern warships have defenses for these, but the giant, unprotected hulls of oil tankers, they're incredibly vulnerable to these simple, cheap, but absolutely deadly devices. But it gets way more high-tech. Let's talk about bottom mines, also known as influence mines. These things are sophisticated. They sit silently on the seabed and are triggered by a ship's presence, its sound, its magnetic field, or even the pressure change it creates in the water. They can even be programmed to ignore smaller ships and only go after high-value targets like an aircraft carrier or a supertanker. Then you have drift mines, which are so dangerous they're actually forbidden by international law, and for one simple reason: they are completely unpredictable. Once they're in the water, they're just carried by the currents, turning huge stretches of the sea into a lethal lottery. They're less a weapon of war and more a tool of pure terror. And finally, you've got limpet mines. Think of these as the special ops weapon. They're designed for surgical strikes. Deployed by divers or mini-subs, they're slapped right onto a ship's hull. And we know Iran has a history of using these for very specific targeted attacks. Now, this is where the strategic imbalance becomes crystal clear. Iran can seed the entire strait with mines very, very quickly, using swarms of small boats and drones. But clearing them, that is a slow, dangerous, painstaking process that could take months. The U.S. has very few specialized minesweeping ships, and let's be honest, its allies are not exactly eager to risk their own vessels in such a treacherous environment. So while that massive naval threat is brewing, the war on the ground just saw a huge escalation. Iran's most powerful ally, Hezbollah, has now officially jumped into the conflict, opening up an incredibly dangerous new front against Israel. And they didn't just join the fight. They've unveiled a terrifying new tactic, all coordinated with Iran. Here's how it works. Hezbollah launches waves and waves of rockets just to saturate Israel's Iron Dome defense system. The goal is to overwhelm it. Then, while that shield is busy, Iranian ballistic missiles come in right behind to strike their real targets. It's a really sophisticated and deadly multi-layered attack. And make no mistake, Hezbollah is a formidable force. Even with their recent losses, they still have a massive arsenal. We're talking an estimated 25,000 rockets and missiles, over 1,000 drones, and a standing army of up to 50,000 fighters. This is way more than just a militia. It's a powerful, conventional army, complete with elite units that specialize in complex warfare. Okay, but this is absolutely not a one-sided fight. The U.S. and Israel have been launching a fierce counteroffensive of their own, and they've been targeting key Iranian assets and leadership, both inside and outside of Iran. A primary target has been the Basij militia. This is a massive internal paramilitary force that the regime uses to crush any and all dissent. And in what was a pretty significant blow, recent strikes successfully eliminated its national commander. Now, it's not just the Basij's size that makes them a key target, it's also their deeply controversial tactics. There are documented cases of them recruiting adolescents, sometimes directly from schools, and setting up bases in civilian areas to deter attacks. In effect, using their own people as human shields. The counteroffensive also marked an end of a really unique era. The iconic F-14 Tomcat, the jet from Top Gun, has this fascinating history in Iran. They were purchased from the U.S. way back in the 70s and became absolute legends in the Iran-Iraq War. For decades, Iran somehow kept them flying through sheer ingenuity and reverse engineering. But now, recent images confirm the last of their operational F-14s have been destroyed, closing a pretty wild chapter in aviation history. So, all of this brings us to the global picture, because this conflict is just not contained to the Middle East anymore. Not by a long shot. Its repercussions are now spreading across the entire globe. The fallout is truly becoming global. The FBI is now on alert for so-called ghost ships that could potentially launch drones against the U.S. mainland. In a really shocking move, Iranian proxies attacked facilities in Oman, a country that was strictly neutral and was actually hosting peace talks at the time. And on the diplomatic front, alliances are fracturing, with countries like Spain actually withdrawing their ambassador from Israel. So with new fronts opening up, global trade under threat, and diplomatic ties just fraying at the seams, the question really isn't if this conflict will spread anymore, but how far. And it forces all of us to ask a really heavy question. Are we watching the first shots of a new global conflict? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.